Hello and welcome to this video on how to revise. Today we're talking through the core revision cycle and we're taking a look at the 5 components for revision, which are to plan, learn, test, apply and improve. Let's begin by talking about the purpose of revision. So what actually is the point of revising? And I always say that revision is an investment in your future success because it's about securing the knowledge you need in your memory so you can then recall it in the exam room. So let's talk through the key points here. The first purpose of revision is to remember knowledge you need for exams. When we are revising, we are strengthening the neural pathways and we are securing that knowledge in our memory so you can then recall it in the exam room. That means you'll be able to answer exam questions with confidence, and so you will achieve the best results that you can. So how is it that we should revise? Well, I would advise that you follow the revision cycle, and this is made up of 5 components that you repeat and revisit regularly. So you begin by planning your revision, you then move on to learning the content, you then test yourself and do your retrieval practice, you then apply your knowledge to exam style questions, and finally you then identify and improve any gaps in your knowledge and understanding. It is important that you then repeat the cycle because in order to achieve the highest grades in all of your subjects, it's really important that you are revisiting topics when you are revising. You can't just revise it once and think that that's enough. It's really important that we are revisiting topics as part of our revision. And that brings me on to the 2 important principles that underpin revision. They are retrieval practice and then spaced practice. Let's begin by talking about retrieval practice, also known as active recall. And this is the most important revision technique. It's where you try to remember information without using your notes. So in order to revise effectively, you can't just be reading through your notes and highlighting random words. It's really important that you actually cover up your notes and you close your book and then test yourself and you see what you can actually recall from memory. And this is really, really effective because it will strengthen the neural pathways and it will strengthen your memory. So you can then recall that information easily when you're in the exam room. The second important principle that we'll be talking about today is called spaced practice. And this is where you revise the same content again after a gap. And that is why revision needs to be seen as a cycle. We don't just revise something once and think that's enough. We need to be revisiting and we need to be repeating because the more times that we revise something, the stronger our memory will become. And that will make it easier to remember and recall that information in the exam room. That then brings me on to the first stage, the first component of our cycle, which is to plan your revision. Because when you are revising, it's really important to be clear about what you are revising and also when you will be doing that revision. Because of course, organisation is essential. You are studying multiple subjects and you are revising for multiple exams. So really important to be organised. And that begins by deciding what it is you are going to revise. I would advise that you use the specification for each subject to help you plan your revision. So the specification is a list from the exam board of all the topics you need to know for each exam paper. So make sure you've printed that off and you then actually use that as a tick list because you can tick each topic off once you have revised it. Now, make sure that you are breaking the topics down into chunks. We want to make it as manageable as possible. And then when you have actually decided which topics you will be revising, you then need to decide when you will do that revision. So actually schedule that in on a weekly basis and then make sure you do follow your revision schedule so that you're able to cover all of the topics and you're able to revise all of your subjects well in advance of your exams. Our next stage on the cycle is to then actually learn the content. So of course, you've now decided which area of the specification you want to be working on. So it's now time to actually learn that content. And this is where the encoding happens. So this is where we are taking the information in. My advice here would be to use your class notes or to watch videos, for example, on YouTube. You could also use the revision guide, and make sure that you are focusing on the key terms and the key ideas. So don't try to learn absolutely everything. Make sure you're fully focused on what it is you actually need to know for the exam. To make sure everything you are learning is relevant to the exam papers that you will be sitting. Now, I also want you to make sure that when you are learning the content, you are doing that in an active way. So don't just read through the textbook and highlight random words. Make sure that you are doing something active with that information. For example, you're taking bullet point notes. You might be making a mind map for each topic, and then you can make links and connections between the different pieces of information, or it might be that you're creating a summary page for each topic. So when you are learning the content, make sure you are learning relevant content and make sure you are being active in your approach, that you're really thinking about the content you're covering and you are engaging with it. And as I mentioned, that might mean making bullet point notes, creating a mind map, or doing your own summary page where you put that information into your own words. And as I mentioned, this is where the encoding is taking place. So this is where you are actually learning the content and you are taking that information in. What we then need to do is test ourselves on that information, and we need to check whether we have retained that knowledge in our memory. So this brings us on to the next component, and this is known as testing yourself. So it's really important that once you have learned the content, you then actually test yourself on it. So that means covering up your notes, closing your book, and then doing your retrieval practice. And retrieval practice means that you can check and you can test what it is you have remembered. And that is really, really important because this helps you to then secure that knowledge in your memory, which means you'll then be able to recall it and use it in the exam room, because testing yourself strengthens the neural pathways in your brain, and therefore it will improve your memory of the information. That then makes it easier to remember that information and recall it in the exam room, meaning that you can answer every question on the exam paper. And we know that the more you test yourself, the stronger your memory will become. So input that is rehearsed is retained. So of course, you've learned all of that content, you've made all of your notes, but we now want to retain all of that knowledge in your memory so that when you do go into the exam room, you can recall it. So how do we actually do this? Well, I would advise that you do your retrieval practice, and that is where you are testing yourself on what you can remember. For example, you might use flashcards where you write a question on the front and then the answer on the back, and you can actually test yourself using those flashcards. You might also do quizzes, you could do them written down, or you might do them on a website or using an app. And this is a great way of checking what you've got right and what you then need to work on. So if there are any gaps in your knowledge, that you can then actually go back and relearn before testing yourself again. And make sure that you do keep testing yourself repeatedly, because the more that you test yourself, the stronger your memory will become, which makes it easier to recall that information in the exam room. It's a little bit like going to the gym and lifting weights. It might be hard to do at first, but the more times somebody does it, the easier it becomes. And this is exactly the same when it comes to recalling information from your long-term memory. The more that we do it, the more that we test ourselves and we recall that information, the easier it becomes to remember it. So then when you're in the exam room, it will be really easy to recall the knowledge that you need to know. What we then need to do is apply that knowledge to exam papers. So once you have learned the content and tested yourself on it, you then want to apply it to exam style questions, because of course, what we need to do in order to achieve the highest grades is make sure we are answering every question in a way that will allow our examiner to award us the maximum number of marks. We've got to take that knowledge and we've got to apply it to exam style questions and past paper questions, because I always say that in order to secure a grade 9 or an A star, you need two things. You need to have that expert subject knowledge, which of course we now know we've got because we've learned the content and we've tested ourselves, but you also need expert exam technique. And that means that you know the command word. So you know what the exam board mean when they're asking you to explain or to evaluate, because then if you do know the command words, you'll be able to answer the question completely and you won't be going off on a tangent. You won't be adding too little or too much information. You know exactly what it is they are looking for. So what I want you to do at this stage is become an expert on answering the questions. So you want to be an expert at applying all of that knowledge you have to the exam style questions. And that can involve reading model answers, which can inspire you in terms of how to write your own. And it can also give you some great information to include in your own answers. It also means then practicing under exam timing. So make sure you are becoming familiar and comfortable with answering questions under exam timing, so that when you do go into that exam room, you can feel confident about being able to answer every question and completing the paper within the allocated time. And also then make sure when you have done a past paper question, you are using the mark scheme to self-assess it, because again, that will give you an idea of what the examiners are looking for, and that will then help you to improve your own answers going forward. So make sure that once you have learned the content and you have tested yourself on it, you are then actually applying your knowledge to exam style questions, and you are developing that confidence and that expertise when it comes to answering exam questions. What we then finally need to do is take a step back and review. So this brings us to our final component, the final stage of our cycle for now, which is to improve the gaps. So of course, you have learned the content, you have tested yourself, you have applied that knowledge to exam style questions. Now it is time to identify any gaps in your knowledge and any areas for improvement. So this is where you then think, right, did I make any mistakes when I was doing my retrieval practice or when I was doing my past paper questions? Did I make any mistakes? Are there any areas where I don't feel as confident? And what you can then do is go back and relearn that difficult content. You can then redo those exam questions after reading through the mark scheme, after taking a look at model answers. And that will then really help you to fill in those gaps in your knowledge, but also to then feel confident for the actual exam, because you know that whatever topic comes up, you will be able to answer the question. Make sure you are spending this time on improving the gaps. What you might do is write a new revision list of the topics that you didn't feel as confident working on, and you can then focus on them for your next revision cycle. So you can then go back through the cycle focused on those areas which you know are areas for improvement. And that will then really help you to obviously know the content which you need to know, but also to feel confident going into the exam room. So if we bring all of this together and we take a look at the cycle as a whole, what are the key takeaways for your revision? Well, make sure that you are using the cycle to plan, learn, test, apply, and improve. Really important that you are following that cycle for all of your subjects so that you can get the highest grades in all of your exams. I want you to remember that consistency is absolutely key for effective revision and achieving exam success. And being consistent is all about having that commitment. So making sure that you don't just revise something once and think that you're done. Make sure that you are then going back over and you are revisiting those topics, especially the difficult ones, to make sure you have secured that knowledge in your memory and that you can then recall it in the exam room. And finally, please remember that greatness is a choice, that the effort you put in today will shape the results that you achieve on results day. As I mentioned earlier on, revision is an investment. So if you do keep following the cycle and you do keep putting in that effort, it will pay off for you, because you will be able to answer all of the questions in the exam and you'll be able to achieve really great results on results day. So I wish you every success with your revision, and I wish you the very best for your exams. Have a good day.